Now, our politicians, they've been so asleep at the wheel with our defence. It's not just electricity prices, how about defence? And now, I have to say, it's all too late, as the Albanese government is now scrambling to get ready for a war in our region coming very soon, potentially. Well, it used to actually be thought that the Chinese dictatorship would invade Taiwan, an island democracy, it says is China's, maybe 5 years from now, maybe 5 years or longer. But now, both the US State Secretary and the Chief of US Naval Operations say China could in fact attack Taiwan within a year.
When we talk about the 2027 window, in my mind, that has to be a 2022 window or potentially a 2023 window. I can't rule that out. I don't mean at all to be alarmist by saying that. It's just that we can't wish that away.
It would be complete fantasy and wishful thinking to think such a war would not hurt us or that we wouldn't in fact be involved in some way. It's not just because the war to our north will devastate trade. We are more or less pledged to defend Taiwan. And the government, our government, has now allowed 6 US B-52 bombers capable of carrying nuclear bombs to essentially base themselves in the Northern Territory for that eventuality. We're expanding the Tyndall base there to accommodate them. A Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman is warning us against this.
The relevant US behaviours have increased regional tensions, seriously undermined regional peace and stability, and may trigger an arms race in the region.
But that was mild in comparison to what a spokesman for the Chinese Communist Party said.
China is a force. If anyone threatens China with force, they will be dealt with by force in return.
So things could get very ugly very fast. But where are those submarines we've been talking about for a decade? Where are all our missiles and home-built drones? To anyone following this show, it'll be no surprise that two big industry groups, the Australian Industry and Defence Network, the Australian Industry Group, both say today that the way that our armed forces have been buying weapons and equipment has been terrible. We order the wrong things, we get things too late, we get bureaucrats who don't cooperate with our domestic arms industry. Well, joining me is someone who's warned about this for years and often on this show, Australia's top foreign affairs writer, Greg Sheridan of The Australian. Greg, thank you so much for your time. First, the US warning of war with China, a war as early as, well, the next 12 months. Is that really likely?
Yes, Andrew, I think it's a serious possibility. I'd say it's not 50-50 yet, but it's got to be, you know, better than 20%, or they wouldn't be saying it. So one of the people who says it's Anthony Blinken, he's the US Secretary of State. I interviewed him a few months ago. He's your classic East Coast American Mandarin policymaker. He's very courtly, very brilliant. He is the last person on the planet to shoot his mouth off. He has said it now and reiterated that a Chinese military move against Taiwan in the next 12 months is a serious possibility. Now, I hear that the Americans may have a military planning, you know, just a touch of a military planning document from the Chinese or something like this. This is certainly a well-based statement. Blinken and Admiral Gilday wouldn't say it. So just as war in Ukraine was unthinkable to us 2 years ago, war in Taiwan is unthinkable, but the Americans wouldn't be warning about it. Also, the Taiwanese and the Japanese Prime Minister in an interview with me, they wouldn't all be warning about it if it wasn't a real possibility.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Ukraine. Of course, this seems to be a leaf out of that textbook too. The US warning Russia is going to invade. It is going to invade, hoping to deter it. And now it's doing the same with China. What is driving this sort of shrinking of the timeline of war from 5 years to 1 year, potentially? We're not saying it's going to happen, potentially. Is that in part, do you think, I mean, we're speculating here, Greg, in part driven by China perhaps calculating that while Joe Biden is in the White House, that it's got a weak adversary. It can't count, you know, if it's a Trump or someone else afterwards, it might not be the same game.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair line of analysis, Andrew. I think there are a few things at work. Xi Jinping is apparently, I think, 69. He's desperate to do this on his watch. He probably expects to rule for the rest of his life, but, you know, he's only got maybe another 5 or 10 vigorous years ahead of him. Secondly, I think at a very objective level, time may not be on China's side. Time may not be China's friend. The Americans are slowly moving their defence force to be more capable to deal with the Chinese in the Pacific. But right now, just right now, the West has used an enormous amount of its ammunition and missiles and everything in Ukraine. Quite right to do so, but Western production, I mean, we're the worst in the world, but Western production generally of this ordnance is simply inadequate. You're right, they certainly do assess Biden as weak. They've been a bit surprised at the strength of the Western support for Ukraine, but they did see the Americans cut and run from Afghanistan. They can see that although Biden says he would defend Taiwan, which is, I'm glad he says that, he just doesn't look like someone who's willing to do that. And there's still, you know, the Americans are moving in the right direction with their defence force, but there's no urgency. Joe Biden's not trying to increase American defence spending. Their Navy's too small. They don't have enough missiles themselves. Their own submarine production is slow compared to what they need. So I think there's every chance that the senior Chinese are saying, you know what, the correlation of forces looks pretty good right now. There's still enormous risk to it for them, so they may not do it. But I think that it is quite possible they're saying, let's go now while Joe's in the White House.
Now, many Australians will be thinking or even hoping that if there's a war, China attacking Taiwan, that doesn't have to affect us. It's not really our war. I even see people already saying we shouldn't be helping the Americans. For instance, the US spy facility at Pine Gap that we host, already make us a target. What's your view?
Well, I think we have to help. We have to help. First of all, a basic matter of principle. Taiwan is a peaceful, human rights observing, functionally independent, 24-carat democracy. If we take it as a matter of principle that a dictatorship should be able to invade that democracy and subdue it, why on earth would anybody ever come to our assistance? Second of all, if we were under threat. Second of all, if the Americans are fighting in the Pacific and dying to safeguard democracy and we stay out of it, that's the end of the American alliance. We'll never, ever again have an American commitment to our security. Third of all, if the Chinese get Taiwan, they will be massively empowered strategically. They would be able to project force anywhere in the Pacific. We have no idea what the limit of their strategic ambitions are. They'll be chasing the Americans out of the region. They'll be able to stop our trade in a minute with blockades. You just see ceding the region to China, and who knows what they might decide about us. And then finally, unless we preemptively repudiate the American alliance, we are already a target. Pine Gap is the most important intelligence collecting facility operated anywhere in the world outside of the United States. And if there's a serious military conflict, it will be a number one priority target for the Chinese. But so will other targets. I mean, they might decide that they'd rather destroy our submarine base than have our 6 submarines possibly enter the fray. They might decide that they'd like to destroy the Northern Territory Air Force bases where Americans might operate out of. Now, unless we're willing to say we preemptively surrender to China and we're going to repudiate the Americans in advance, we're a target as soon as the balloon goes up. And then finally, Andrew, all our trade stops on the first day of the war. Can we export iron ore to a country which is killing our American allies in combat? Not a chance. So our trade stops on the first day, and we're short of medicines and food and fuel and all the rest within 2 weeks. Our only chance is to deter conflict by having capability ourselves and supporting the Americans.
And of course, if China does succeed and America runs from Taiwan, you will find other fair weather friends, and I suspect even India, peeling off from America and joining China. Will be even more isolated and friendless than ever. Greg Sheridan, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate your analysis.